Hello and welcome back to class. Before we start, I want to explain why we're taking a slight left turn here at the Underground Syllabus. This channel will always be rooted in historical research, forgotten stories, and the moments that history class usually skip over. But starting with last week's video, I want to talk about hip-hop. Now I realize that some people might question the relevance of hip-hop in a history curriculum, but let me explain. Back in college, I took a Russian history through the arts class. We studied novels, poetry, paintings, music, even ballet. Because one of the best ways to understand a society is to understand the art that society creates. Art tells us what people fear, what they value, what they dream about, and what they're surviving. And hip-hop became one of the most influential cultural movements on earth. It shaped music, fashion, language, sports, film, politics, and global youth culture itself. Artists like Rakim, KRS-One, and Kendrick Lamar, they're more than just entertainers. In many ways, they're historians, anthropologists, journalists reporting back from worlds that most Americans never directly see. And to a kid growing up in Western Kentucky, those stories felt dangerous, exciting, almost mythological. In a lot of ways, it wasn't that different from how kids in the 50s and the 60s idolized cowboys, outlaws, and the mythology of the American West. My generation grew up mythologizing hip-hop. So over these next couple episodes, we're going to explore the history of hip-hop, how it emerged from abandoned neighborhoods in New York City, and how it became one of the most dominant cultural forces in modern history. Welcome back to the Underground Syllabus. The sun rose over New York City on July 14th, 1977, and the world looked exactly the same. The same humid air, the same burned out buildings, the same financial ruin. But inside the apartments of the South Bronx, everything had changed. Underneath beds, in the backs of closets, hidden behind worn out couches, was the plunder of the blackout. Technics SL 1200 turntables, GLI mixers, massive wood-paneled Pioneer receivers, the keys to the kingdom, pulled from the dark. Mainstream historians will tell you the blackout caused millions of dollars in property damage, but they're measuring the wrong currency. Because that night, the Bronx didn't just loot electronics stores, it looted a printing press. And over the next 4 years, a handful of sonic scientists would use that equipment to map out an entirely new universe. By the fall of 1977, the Bronx had been carved into invisible kingdoms. If you wanted heavy bass, pure Jamaican sound system power, and speaker stacks that could shake the fillings out of your teeth, you went west, to Cedar Park, to find DJ Kool Herc and the Mighty Herculoids. But if you wanted something bigger than a party, if you wanted to watch a street culture transform into a worldwide movement, you went east, to the Bronx River Houses, where a former Black Spades warlord named Kevin Donovan, now calling himself Afrika Bambaataa, was building the Universal Zulu Nation. Bambaataa wasn't just a DJ. He was a cultural diplomat, a curator, a recruiter, a visionary. He played James Brown alongside rock records, Latin percussion, calypso, and strange electronic music imported from Germany. At a time when much of America was telling young people in the Bronx what they couldn't be, Bambaataa was showing them what they could become. Teaching a forgotten neighborhood that the entire world belonged to them. Whatever else history would eventually reveal about him, in the late 1970s, Bambaataa was one of the central architects of hip-hop culture. But if you wanted to see the future, If you wanted to watch music become mathematics, you went south. To a quiet kid named Joseph Sadler. The streets knew him as Grandmaster Flash. And while Herc built the foundation and Bambaataa built the culture, Flash was about to build the machine. Flash didn't look at records the way other people did. He didn't hear songs. He saw landscapes, grooves, valleys, tiny physical maps hidden inside spinning vinyl. He would crouch over turntables for hours, studying records like a watchmaker. Kool Herc's merry-go-round technique was revolutionary, but it was still human. Herc dropped the needle by feel, by instinct, by ear. Flash wanted precision, perfection, so he treated the turntable like a laboratory. He took a crayon and physically marked the vinyl, identifying the exact moment a breakbeat began. He invented the backspin, manually pulling the record backward, catching the groove, and releasing it in perfect rhythm. He called it the quick mix theory. But Flash still had a problem. Commercial mixers in the 1970s wouldn't let DJs hear a record privately before the audience heard it. Every transition was blind. So Flash went searching through electronics junk shops, bought a single pole double throw switch, and soldered it directly into his club and mixer. The Peekaboo.
What I did is I went to Radio Shack and bought what's called a single pole double throw switch, whereas in the center it would be off. When you clicked it to the left, you pre-heard the left turntable, and when you double clicked it over to the right, you pre-heard the other one. And what I did is I crazy glued it to the top of the mixer, and then what I did was I wired between the switches an external amplifier that pushed about 5 or 6 watts, just enough wattage to drive a headphone. This enabled me to pre-hear what it was that I was doing. And the mixers of that time didn't have crossfader, so I was actually doing it with an up and down sort of mixer. So I took a mic mixer and just totally converted it.
For the first time, a DJ could secretly monitor the next record in headphones, while the crowd danced to the current one. Modern DJs still use that idea today. Suddenly, the transition between songs wasn't a break anymore. It was seamless, a continuous loop of energy. The DJ was no longer just playing music. The DJ had become the instrument. But here was the catch. If you lived in Brooklyn in 1978, or Queens, or Western Kentucky, you probably had no idea any of this was happening. Radio stations ignored it. Record labels didn't understand it. There were no music videos, no studios, no industry infrastructure. So how did a hyper-local street culture, born inside a few square miles of the Bronx, spread across the world? Through magnetic tape. Not radio, not television, not record labels. Tape. Teenagers started showing up to park jams carrying portable cassette records and boomboxes. Some plugged directly into the DJ mixer. Others just held cheap microphones toward the speaker stacks. And they hit record. When the party ended at 3 a.m., the tape became treasure. These weren't polished studio albums. You could hear the wind moving through the park, sirens in the distance, crowds screaming after a perfect cut. You could hear Grandmaster Flash slicing up "Take Me to the Mardi Gras" live in real time, while MCs shouted over the beat. The imperfections were part of the magic. Kids took those master tapes home, dubbed copies onto dual cassette decks in their bedrooms, and sold them hand to hand for $5 a piece. The party tapes. They became the underground internet of the late 1970s, traveling through subway cars, high school hallways, basketball courts, and city blocks, carrying the slang, the rhythm, the fashion, the technical innovations of the Bronx, directly into the ears of kids who had never stepped foot there. Before hip-hop became an industry, it was a bootleg economy, passed hand to hand, in the shadows. The blackout gave kids access to the equipment. Herc built the foundation. Bambaataa built the culture. Flash built the machine. But none of them knew what was coming next. Because once the party tapes escaped the Bronx, hip-hop stopped being a local phenomenon. The signal was spreading. And somewhere in New Jersey, record executives were finally starting to notice. The next chapter of the story wouldn't happen in a park. It would happen in a recording studio. And it would change music forever. If you're still here, thank you. I genuinely enjoyed researching and telling these stories, and I hope you've enjoyed hearing them. Next week, we'll continue on our journey through the history of hip-hop and watch it evolve from park jams, rec centers, and homemade cassette tapes into the most influential musical movement of the modern era. So I hope you'll join me back here for that. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel. Give the video a like, share it with someone you think might enjoy it, and help us spread these stories a little further. Because history doesn't just belong in a textbook. It belongs in the conversations we're still having today. Until next time, I'm David, and this has been the Underground Syllabus.